What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer for BamaOnLine, and I'm joined by Jimmy Stein once again. And we're here to talk a big weekend in Tuscaloosa. Alabama had its first scrimmage on Saturday, and then on Sunday, Jimmy and I were at the stadium for an open fan day practice, and that's always a lot of fun. Got to enjoy some shade and some football on a Sunday, and I saw quite a bit. I think, though, we'll start with the scrimmage because that was the first thing that happened this weekend. It's closed to media, so no surprise there. That's unchanged from the Nick Saban era. But Jimmy, from what you've gathered, from what we've had on the site, what was maybe the biggest takeaway from that first scrimmage at Bryant-Denny?
Yeah, I'm going to go a little obscure based on some info. Josh Cuevas had a touchdown. C.J. Dupree caught a couple balls. And when you combine that information based with what we've seen in some media viewing periods and at the open practice, it's not like this is a major shock to people hearing this, but the tight ends are going to be involved in the pass game. I mean, Cuevas, I think, is really good as a pass receiver. I think even though it was a different offense, he's in line to sort of play last year's Amari Nablack role as the mismatched tight end. And the tight end, they move around, they split out, line up in the backfield, sometimes line him up at the normal Y spot. But I think Cuevas is sort of their mismatch guy. But C.J. Dupree may be a little underrated as a pass catcher. Obviously, he's a block first guy with it. He's got an NFL body, up front, and they're going to be impressed with that. If he can catch the ball, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's probably going to get his NFL shot, a year from now. But I think Alabama's going to throw it to the tight ends more than people think, and they'll be very active, particularly Dupree and Cuevas. So, what was your big takeaway from your scrimmage info?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that's music to Alabama fans' ears. That's kind of a yearly question: are we going to throw the ball to tight end? And I think you're right that Alabama's tight end group has done well this preseason, but I also think it's probably one of the most underrated positions on the roster because it has a good mix of veteran presence. You add a guy in Josh Cuevas who knows this offense. And then when we were at practice on Sunday to see him kind of running with the ones, you could tell he's very fluid as a route runner. So, no, I think that's a good pick there. I think for me, it's tough not to pick Ryan Williams. It really is. He's continued to have a big preseason. I think he's a guy that obviously had to play a little catch up coming in the summer, but with a good start to fall camp, carries that over to a productive day in the scrimmage. It's going to be tough to keep number 2 off the field, I think. And then I think if you're just talking about maybe a standout on offense and a standout on defense, I think hearing the positive buzz about a guy like LT Overton, we've wondered about that bandit position. And I think Jamarian Latham's going to play a ton of football. He's waited his turn. He's played some good football for Alabama in the past. But to add a guy like LT Overton, who's playing a more natural position after starting his career at Texas A&M, I think that's going to be a bonus for an Alabama front that looks really, really strong, really deep, and that's going to be big for that secondary in the back end. I think you had some notes on LT Overton too. Just what have you thought about him this preseason and how he's kind of meshed with this Alabama defense?
I think he just came along at the right time. Here's the really weird part where I think time is going to show LT Overton got a little lucky. And by that, I mean, he transferred, he picked Alabama, leaving A&M. I think A&M sort of had him in the wrong spot, a sort of square peg, round hole issue with Overton in A&M scheme. Now, of course, they had a coaching change.
Right.
But then he picks Alabama, the Nick Saban defense, to come over here probably to play either the Aboigbe defensive line position from a year ago or maybe Jack, but probably the Justin Aboigbe role. And I guess they were kind of selling him on that. But then Saban retires. Well, the new staff comes in with a custom-built position for that guy. That's what I mean by he got lucky. The new staff that he didn't even pick, they show up with a scheme that they've got a position that seems to fit him perfectly, which was an issue at A&M. It might have been somewhat of an issue in the Saban thing. We don't know because we never saw it. But I just think the bandit position in Kane Womack's defense fits LT Overton perfectly, and he no longer has the round hole square peg issue. I think he's a good fit, and I like the duo. You've already mentioned Jamarian Latham. I couldn't agree more. He's going to play a lot. I sort of like them. In baseball, they call it a platoon. I sort of like that duo because you can see Latham holding up really well against the run.
Yeah.
And you can see Overton getting after the passer from that spot. And from what I've heard from the scrimmage Saturday, Overton did have a really nice day and was normally matched up against Caden Proctor. And that's even more encouraging to me because I'm pretty confident that Proctor is going to be a really good player this year. And if Overton is beating Proctor a couple times in the scrimmage, I think that's great news for Alabama's defense and LT. And I'm sort of expecting a nice year from the guy.
I will say this too. We don't want to give everything away because we got a ton of information over at BOL. You guys should check that out if you haven't. But looking at the video Alabama put out, and then also just hearing from people, be remiss if we didn't mention the Caleb Odom catch along the sideline. Seems like that was a highlight of the day. And he's a guy that I'm curious to see how much he'll play because we'll get to it in a little bit. But looking at the practices, I don't know if he's in that first one or two group just yet, but I'm curious to see what they could do with him just from a mismatch standpoint, because I think he's exactly that. You mentioned Cuevas fitting into that Amari Niblack role. That was what Nick Saban and the previous staff said of Niblack. But a guy like Caleb Odom, man, I don't know a guy in a secondary that can cover someone that big.
No, that's exactly right. And I do think had the Saban staff stayed and Odom played tight end as they sort of recruited him to play, then he would be sort of that Amari Niblack role. That's kind of who he is and what he does. He's excellent. We say he's moved to receiver, but the fact is, and Bone and Hastings cover this well in recruiting, and Tim, Caleb Odom came to Alabama as a receiver. He was playing wide receiver throughout his high school career at Carrollton. He was going to be taught and gain weight and play tight end in college, but he's always been a receiver, and I'm sure that's why the transition for him has been pretty smooth, and I'm excited to see it. But like you said, Charlie, so true that first group is getting a little crowded, which is a good thing for Alabama fans, that it's crowded and tough to break into. That's exactly what you want.
It is, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But sticking with that first scrimmage, we heard from Kalen DeBoer afterwards. He didn't really reveal a whole lot. Kind of sticking with tradition. There was no stats given out for this scrimmage, but spoke at length about the scrimmage. There were some kind of, I guess, curveballs that weren't really about what happened on the field, which is a little odd. But I'll start with, we're going to talk about like our takeaways from this press conference, and I'll start with just what I asked him about, and that's what he saw from Jalen Milroe and the quarterbacks. And Kalen DeBoer said that he thought the plays that were there, you need to make that throw, that they were doing that, and they've been doing that throughout camp. But it's good to see that translate to kind of a game-like practice. He did say that there's maybe a time or two where he thought they could throw the ball away, which I think some people will harken back to last season when they're thinking of Jalen Milroe, but he said he's not just talking about Jalen. It's kind of the whole group. And with a scrimmage like that, you do kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because these guys are wearing black jerseys. They're not getting tackled, so they kind of know that in the back of their heads. But it sounds like there's still a little bit of things for them to work on, which I think is not a bad thing right here going into what would this be, practice number 11. So there's still plenty of time for them to clean some things up, but it sounded like overall he was pleased with those guys leading the offense.
Yeah, it was the best question, and I thought the best answer in terms of that's what everybody wants to know. I mean, it's always the first question. It doesn't matter whether the quarterback is a returning starter or if there's a quarterback competition. Everyone wants to know about the quarterback. It's a super interesting question because of DeBoer's success with Michael Penix and now inheriting quarterback that I'm not saying he's like Penix. Really, I find him much different, but he's toolsy like Penix. I mean, Penix got drafted where he did because of his tools. Jalen Milroe has great tools, and I think everyone's real curious, okay, how's Milroe going to fit in with what DeBoer does and Nick Sheridan does? And hey, based on what his answer is, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, but it won't be perfect. It won't be perfect. There's going to be still some teaching moments. He's a redshirt junior. He's only, I think, coming off of maybe 14 starts in his career. So he's got some experience, but he's also not Michael Penix. I say this all the time, Charlie, when I see the comparison, and here I am sort of making the comparison myself, but every time I hear it, I try to bring up every time. Michael Penix was in his 6th year of college football and his 6th year starting games. Jalen Milroe is an inexperienced newbie compared to where Penix was a year ago. And people need to take that into account when they're like, they want to compare, will Milroe this season have Penix's season last year? Milroe's a lot younger with a lot less experience, and I'm not sure that's fair to Jalen. But nevertheless, Milroe's pretty toolsy, so I'm very curious to see what it looks like come game time.
No doubt. And I'll say this, Kalen didn't really tip his hand too much when it came to evaluating the scrimmage, but it sounds like by all accounts, Jalen had a big day. I think he was very positive in the scrimmage. I think Ty Simpson was as well. It sounds like Ty's had a really good fall camp too. So whenever you heard from the head coach after that first scrimmage, was there anything else that stuck out to you?
Just once again on that point, I talked to two different people that I would call not Jalen Milroe doubters. That's not what I mean, but two people that were wanting to see Milroe take steps forward. Mm-hmm. And both of them independently were impressed by what they saw on Saturday. So in other words, Jalen Milroe must be progressing if he's sort of winning people over. Kalen DeBoer has been really, really speaking highly of Jalen since the spring. It's not really new that it would happen in the fall, but also don't want to create this idea that what we're going to see is some sort of perfect guy, that all of the issues have been ironed out, that everything's perfect. Now, it won't be that way. It'll never be that way. But all the word from the scrimmage with Jalen and Ty Simpson that Josh Pate even mentioned today, the famous Josh Pate, he mentioned in a tweet today that he's hearing good things about Jalen and Ty Simpson. And of course, Charlie and I are too.
Yeah, I think it's crazy to kind of compare where Alabama was this time last year from a quarterback standpoint to see just the positive, vibes coming out of preseason camp. And I think, most players are going to improve year over year, but for these guys to kind of make the leaps they have is certainly, I think, a promising sign for Alabama. I do think that Kalen DeBoer, Nick Sheridan, this offensive staff have something to do with that too. But I do think it's the players and the way that they have attacked this offseason. But yeah, I think offensively they've been doing well. It sounded like the running game was really good in the scrimmage. Also, I think both quarterbacks contributed to that. But guys like Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, they did some good things.
Yeah, good players, and we're about to talk about the open practice. They must have done something Saturday because none of them were practicing Sunday. So they must have gotten a lot of action and probably got a little deep. But it was crazy. 5 scholarship running backs, and only one of them was really a full go for Sunday. It happened to be Justice Haynes, but all 4 of the other backs a little dinged up. I think people don't need to get carried away like they're, quote, hurt or injured. Like I said on the board Sunday is, imagine if Alabama had a full pad practice the day after they played a game. Yeah, how many players wouldn't be out there? They would be in the hot tub. They'd be in the cold tub or the hot tub or in the training room the day after a game. Hey, a scrimmage, 102 play scrimmage, that means, you're talking about 50, 60 plays for your ones. And that's really almost a full game. So of course there were some guys just a little dinged up. I mean, there's a difference between being dinged up and being injured. And only Haynes was a go on Sunday. That tells me that the backs got quite a bit of action on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll say this. This is the last kind of bit from DeBoer's press conference because he kind of mentioned it in his opener, and he talked about it later, just how Alabama is relatively healthy. Nothing that you wouldn't expect at this time of year. Guys are dinged up, and that was evident on Sunday in the open practice. But that's kind of going to be a priority moving forward. Alabama's roughly only halfway through the preseason, but it sounds like that next scrimmage coming up this coming weekend, that's going to be a lot lighter just in terms of the number of plays. And that's because they can see game 1 on the horizon and they don't want to get any guys banged up. It sounds like you look across the country, teams like Texas A&M, they've had some key players go down, and Alabama doesn't really want to be a part of that. So I guess shifting gears to that Sunday practice, while they were on the field, they practiced for 2 hours. Hell, they were in full pads, which is a little bit surprising to me. It wasn't as intense from a contact standpoint, I don't think. Right. Even later in the practice, we just kind of saw the 3s versus the 3s for a lot of the time. So watching that practice from our vantage point at Bryant-Denny Stadium, what was maybe the outside of the guys that were missing, what was maybe the biggest takeaway for you?
Well, that's a great question. We got to see so much. We normally get to be, at practice for 4 or 5 periods. Got to see, I don't know, maybe I guess they probably went about 20 periods although they didn't start counting until they'd been out there for about 20
a little
minutes.
confusing on their part.
It was. But I would say biggest takeaway for me, I'm just going to brag on Ryan. You know, we talked about Ryan in the scrimmage and what he did to garner attention. Sunday, there's just more Ryan Williams. And to me, it was just seeing Ryan with the first group. You know, he clearly practiced with the first group to get on the field at wide receiver. He looked the part. I thought he looked really quick in and out of his breaks. He never looks lost. He's a freshman. He should be preparing at Saraland to play Jackson High School in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, he should be getting ready for a Jamboree game.
No, that's exactly right. And instead, he's getting ready to play Western Kentucky. But he did not look lost at any point. It looks like he belongs. Caught the ball well throughout drills, and then played with the ones. To me, it just was sort of big in the sense that I've accepted it that Ryan is going to be a significant part of this offense. We didn't know with his age and showing up this summer, was Ryan going to be with the ones? Was he going to be with the twos? Was this going to be too much for a 17-year-old that only weighs, around 170 pounds? I think we're getting the answer, Charlie. I think Ryan Williams was ready for this, and we're going to see him early and often, and he's one of the better players on this offense.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway for me is just seeing that first group of wide receivers, because we've been so accustomed to seeing Jeremy Bernard, Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, and I still think that's probably the first group we might see game one. They're going to play a bunch. Those are your most proven players, whether at Alabama or elsewhere. But from basically start to finish, I didn't really see it change throughout that 2-hour practice that we were out there. It was the first team offense was Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams, and Cole Adams in the slot. I think that raised some eyebrows, not necessarily in a bad way. I think those guys have worked hard in preseason camp. They've played well. So I think that first group was very interesting. And then the second group, you had Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, and Emmanuel Henderson. I think we went into fall camp knowing that Bernard, Law, Prentice, and maybe Henderson, because he is a guy that's been in the program, we're going to contribute and be a part of that rotation. But we kind of wondered who's next up. And then Cole Adams is right there in the mix. Heck, he was playing first team minutes the entire practice on Sunday. And you have Ryan Williams. That's because when we were talking about Caleb Odom earlier, it's just kind of a question of, well, where does he fit in? Because that next group was Caleb and Jaron Hamilton and Rico Scott for a lot of the time. So I don't think Alabama's going to play 9 wide receivers. I think 6 is very realistic. Maybe they do 7, 8. But those first 2 groups of 3, I think they're going to play a lot. And it's so fascinating now to see kind of a little mix-up. I'm going to be really interested to see on Tuesday when we're out there at practice for now just 3 or 4 periods again, if we get a glimpse at those receiver lines where they have the Z and the X and the H lined up there and what they look like. Because if it is the same, I think that's kind of your trajectory. We saw this just a couple of years ago. Guys like Trayshawn Holden made a move early in preseason camp and got some first team minutes. Now, I think these guys are a little better than Trayshawn Holden, I'll admit, but I'm really interested to see if it's going to be like a rotation of sorts or if, Ryan Williams and Cole Adams are kind of here to stay with that first group.
I think they are in a wide receiver, a little different than like the offensive line position.
Correct,
where if you win the left tackle job, guess what? You're probably going to be out there for all of the snaps until Coach DeBoer says, okay, the game's over, we won, put in the backups. That left tackle is going to play every snap. Wide receiver, you're going to be switching out. Like Charlie said, 6 guys seems almost a given in an offense like this. 6 is a given. And it looks like we might know who those 6 are. At least we have a good idea. And then there's a question, will there be a 7th guy? Will there be an 8th guy? I know fans, they would love to see Odom. They would love to see even some of the other true freshmen. But let's just remember, in a tight game where the game can be decided on any snap, you don't always want your receiving core to be your 6th, 7th, and 8th best guy. You need to play your best players to beat the good teams on the schedule. So that's why there's typically not 8, but there might be. Hey, having a glut of talent is a whole lot better problem than not having enough.
No, you're not wrong there. And you mentioned the offensive line, and that was something else that kind of stuck out to me. Well, first of all, there was a couple of guys that were watching off from the sideline. A guy like Tyler Booker and Jaden Roberts were both missing from the first group. So we saw Gino Vandemark move in at left guard, and then Rock Montgomery at right guard. And that was a little surprising to me until later on we saw that Olasalinen was also a little bit limited. And again, all those guys were out there. They were in uniform. Granted, that might have been because of the fan day activities that happened later, but I think that's a good sign just for their availability moving forward, and that's something we're obviously going to keep an eye on Tuesday. But I think for me, whatever happens in the interior happens in the interior. We know who those starting three are going to be if they're healthy. The tackles are where my eyeballs went, and again, it's been Caden Proctor back at his old spot at left tackle. And then I don't really remember a time, Jimmy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, during that open practice where it wasn't Wilkin Formby at right tackle the ones. I didn't see Elijah Pritchett get a single rep. And I might have missed, one or two. I didn't watch a lot of the O-line versus D-line stuff because that's when we were watching the receivers and the DBs and some of the 7-on-7 work. But when they were doing full team stuff at the very least, it looked like it was Wilkin holding on to that right tackle spot. And, hearing from a guy like Chris Kapilovic, their offensive line coach, that first scrimmage is going to kind of set the table for what's to come. And they can always change. They can rotate guys in. Things can change as quickly as tomorrow. But right now it looks like Wilkin Formby is holding serve, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out at right tackle.
Yeah, it really does, because it seems to me, if I'm remembering this right, my remembering maybe not as good as it once was, but it seems if I'm remembering this right, day one of our media viewing periods, it was Pritchett at left tackle and Formby at right tackle.
Correct.
Then I think as soon as day two, we saw Proctor with the ones at left tackle, but Formby has been a constant. Mm-hmm. I'll just say again, we're limited in what we see. But in the limited time from what we've seen at media viewing and in the open practice, the only first team right tackle I've ever seen is Wilkin Formby. Now, that doesn't mean that that they don't sub them out while we're not there, right, and when they're doing other things. But based on what we've seen, that's what we've seen is Formby at right tackle, Proctor now at left tackle. But that's not to say that Elijah Pritchett isn't a good player. To me, physically, he looks like $1 million out there. He looks like an athlete. He's probably progressing. Just because Formby's ahead of him doesn't mean that Pritchett isn't playing well. My feeling is, based on statements we've heard from Coach Cap and even Kalen DeBoer, my feeling is they'd have a lot of confidence in Pritchett if he had to play. So, hey, having 3 tackles is certainly better than having 0 tackles.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Especially, I think Alabama is in a much better situation they were back in, say, February at tackle. And I will say this, kind of going back to Saturday, it sounded like Wilkin Formby started the scrimmage with the first team, but it also sounded like Elijah Pritchett got some reps with the ones. So, Sunday, though, it was interesting because it's that day after the scrimmage, and Pritchett was practicing. He wasn't banged up like some of these other guys. So that's just something to continue to keep an eye on moving forward. And then defensively, I think we got a really good look at those first 2 defenses, and we saw some mixing and matching. It wasn't just like a solid group like it was on offense, but I think for me, just seeing the amount of those freshman defensive backs that were kind of rotating in that secondary, we saw Xavier Brown play a lot at that one of the corner spots opposite Damani Jackson. He still has that club on his left hand, but it didn't really hinder him much in Sunday's practice, which I think is a good thing. And then we saw Deshaun Jones also play at that corner spot. But to see Xavier Brown, to see Red Morgan get some reps at Husky behind Devontae Smith, he got a few, but behind Devontae Smith, make that point known. I think that these freshmen are going to continue to push their older teammates and challenge for playing time in the season.
Yeah, I'm guessing here, but just a guess after watching that open practice and some media viewing periods, I have a guess. I think Kane Womack's going to play more players on defense than what we had been used to seeing for the last 17 years. Yeah. Now, Saban certainly subbed out his defensive linemen, the bigger-bodied guys, but his back 7 were pretty set and didn't really sub out and rotate much. I'm getting the impression that either Kane Womack either likes to rotate or Alabama just has a second team of guys they have a lot of confidence in, because it just seems that they play a lot of guys with the ones. Now, they may just be taking a look at them, but quite a bit. I would say the 1s and 2s to me on Sunday looked almost a little interchangeable. Like you said, maybe they play some snaps with Zabi in the corner, maybe some snaps with Deshaun. They certainly sub out at the Wolf spot. Q Robinson plays quite a bit, but Keanu Coots sneaks in there. And then we even see Quay Russaw, who, he stands out. To me, every time Quay's on the field, it's like, whoa, look at that dude. So I think we're going to see all three of them. And then inside, maybe they don't sub as much, but there are three. Now, Jihad was one of the guys that was in the banged up crew. So we didn't really see him practice. So Justin Jefferson sort of took his spot. But Charlie, you pointed out several times during this, they had even some true freshmen out there repping next to Deontay Lawson at times. I think we saw Sterling Dixon a time or two. Okoronkwo is out there a time or two. But you got the impression that, hey, if they had to play a game without Jihad, it would be the senior JUCO Justin Jefferson lining up next to Deontay.
Yeah, and that was kind of a bummer. Elijah Jihad's okay. He was even out there, communicating pretty well when he wasn't over on the stationary bike or doing some other things with the training staff. But I kind of wanted to see maybe what that rotation at inside linebacker looked like, if they actually truly view Justin Jefferson as a third starter type, if they're kind of rotating those guys. So that was probably the biggest bummer, I think, for me from that open practice. But I also think, when we did see Sterling Dixon with the ones, it was interesting. I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that. I think if, say, the top three guys weren't available, Jeremiah Alexander is probably your next man up. Kane Womack spoke really highly about him this offseason, and it looks like he's played well too, and he was there continuously with the twos. But you're right, there was a lot of mixing and matching. I'm glad you mentioned the outside backers, because Q Robinson's first up, but here comes 19. A lot of the time, those defensive linemen we saw, I think it was Tim Keenan and Jaheim Otis, but we saw Tim Smith move in a lot. That next platoon is Damon Payne and James Smith. That's 5 really talented defensive linemen that I think are going to play a ton there in the interior. And then, a guy like we mentioned earlier, LT Overton, while he lined up with the 2s quite a bit, he's going to play a lot with the 1. So I think defensively, the depth is something that stands out, especially up front. But I think now, seeing some of how they're interchanging guys in the back end, I think they feel a lot better about the depth at corner and Husky, to be honest, because, yeah, you have some question marks on the boundary because there's a lot of unproven players. But look at that interior spot. Devontae Smith was a guy that was going to play a role last year before he got hurt. I think Red Morgan's been one of the biggest surprises, and in a pleasant way, for this staff. And then King Mack working with the 2s quite a bit. I think he had a pick in the scrimmage on Saturday. So I think we got a really good grasp of where things stand defensively. But I still think that cornerback spot, that's the biggest question mark, because they're kind of rotating some guys out. Now, I wouldn't count on a guy like Jalen Mbakwe just because we didn't mention him. He's garnered some high praise from the coaching staff this preseason, and he's someone that I think is going to continue to push.
Yeah, it feels like he's made a move this fall. Maybe in the spring, there's a lot of learning. And you have to remember, he played a lot of offense in high school, played quarterback quite a bit. Cornerback was sort of new to him, even though he's clearly got every tool to be a great corner. Kind of quiet in the spring. Zabian is who got off to such a good start. Again, a lifetime cornerback playing in an elite program in California. He sort of showed up ready, whereas Bach had to sort of learn his way through. Now that Mbakwe's more comfortable with things, now he's making a move. He's even in the punt return group, which tells me that he's going to play. I mean, not as I'm not saying he's going to be the punt returner. He could be, but the fact that they're auditioning him to potentially be the punt returner, it's almost like a signal that, hey, Mbakwe's going to play in the games, or he wouldn't be auditioning for that role. So I think Charlie's exactly right. Don't be shocked if it ends up number 9, even though 15. Well, he's 2 now. Zabian has gotten a lot of the reps, spring and fall, and of course Deshaun Jones. He's coming off 2 years of starting at Wake, so I like how they have options.
Yeah.
What stinks is if you're still looking for options this time of the year, they have options. And these freshmen are just going to get better and better and better. And Zabian is he's real promising, as is Mbakwe. Even Zay Mincy, who's probably just a normal freshman who's going to be a star player down the road. But he showed up at the same time as Zabian and Mbakwe. So there's a lot of competition there.
Yeah, Zay Mincy with a nice pass breakup in that video that Alabama put out as well. So now, kind of shifting gears, we move to another week of fall camp. Alabama was off today, Monday. So they have 4 practices and a scrimmage this week. We'll get 1 day of viewing on Tuesday, which is a little bit of a bummer after that kind of just feast at the beginning. So for you, whenever we're out there on the practice field tomorrow, what's the biggest thing you're going to be looking for?
I don't know that we'll be able to tell, but what I would like to see is more cemented roles. Yeah. Like, okay, now you're still in fall camp. That's not game prep, but game prep is no longer on the horizon. It's coming. Mm-hmm. You're going to be playing a game pretty soon. I think just now roles being cemented, the guys are going to play, getting most of the reps. That's what you're kind of moving towards, repping the guys that are going to play in the games. So we might see a little bit more of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, varsity versus scout team. But again, real game prep is more than a week away. But I would like to see more, okay, these are the dudes that are going to play.
You're not wrong, because, not to bring him up a bunch, but the thing Nick Saban always talked about is this second scrimmage is you're starting to get guys ready to play that you're going to play in the games. And that's kind of separation time. And I think we'll see a little bit of that. I think for me, that starts kind of at the offensive tackle position. Maybe we see kind of more order in the cornerback drills, because, for the most part, they've just kind of been doing individual work, and they don't care who goes first in those. They're just getting some reps in and as many as they can. And then, kind of circling back to what we talked to toward the top, that wide receiver group, I'm really fascinated just to see kind of the hierarchy there. It's been a little inconsistent throughout the preseason, but I'm fascinated to see Ryan Williams and Cole Adams and maybe where they stand. So it's going to be a fun week. We got some more opportunities from interviews with the defensive coaches tomorrow, offensive guys on Wednesday. And then, of course, we'll hear from Kalen DeBoer after Saturday's scrimmage. But we'll be there. We'll have wall-to-wall coverage, and looking forward to it, my man. I know it's been busy, but we kind of get a little bit of a breather with some of these practice viewings being dialed back.
Hey, I'm excited about it, though. I'm excited about tomorrow, Tuesday. Charlie and I'll both be out there for practice and interviews tomorrow. So hey, we certainly get one more fun day, and we'll be bringing it to y'all. Charlie just rains stories on you guys, literally rains stories on y'all, and I'll be on the board, of course. So stay tuned to BOL for coverage of Tuesday's events.
No doubt. And, we'll continue to do shows like this. It's been fun to kind of recap things with Jimmy. I know Tim and Andrew Bone, maybe Joseph. I don't know if he's already made his way over to Europe or not yet, but I know they have some stuff coming. So if you guys are enjoying these videos, give them a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell too, man. You'll get those notifications when the videos drop. And it's been a lot of fun, and we'll keep them coming. So until next time, everybody, so long.